Hey, this is Nicole Holland of Get Guest Ready, and you are listening to the 360 Entrepreneur with Jan Ilonga.
This is episode 207, and today we talk about how to be a 5-star podcast guest. Here we go.
Welcome to the 360 Entrepreneur Podcast, the show for entrepreneurs and small business owners who dream big and want to do bigger. Join some of the world's top entrepreneurs, internet marketers, and best-selling authors as they share their inspiring stories, their struggles, and give actionable tips that will help you build, grow, and promote your online business. Here's your host, Yanni Lunga.
Hey, how's it going? Have you recovered from all the sweets and Easter chocolate? I know I have. Welcome to this new episode, and today we focus on being a 5-star, not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5-star podcast guest. If you're interested in being featured on podcasts, perhaps you're just getting started with that, or you have been featured on podcasts before and you would like somehow to take the way you present yourself and the value you provide to hosts and audiences to the next level, then you're in the right place. Today we're joined by Nicole Holland, who's the founder of interviewsthatconvert.com, the Business Building Rockstars Summit, and she's also a podcaster. She's the host of the Business Building Rockstars show and her new one, Get Guest Ready podcast. The show notes for today's episode are over at yannilunga.com/episode 207. Again, that's yannilunga.com/episode 207. All right, time to get started because Nicole has plenty of value bombs to drop. Here is the interview with Nicole Holland from interviewsthatconvert.com. In this episode, we're joined by one of my favorite people. And if you listen to podcasts, by the end of this interview, you're going to have a couple of new podcasts that you have to add to your app. She's an entrepreneur, a marketer, and a podcaster. She's the founder of the Business Building Rockstar Summit and the show, as well as the host of her brand new show, the Get Guest Ready podcast. She's also the founder of Interviews That Convert, a service that helps busy CEOs and industry experts get featured on popular podcasts. And guess what? She's here to sharing advice on some of the things you can do to get on podcasts. I'm so excited to welcome on the show my friend Nicole Holland. Nicole, how's it going?
Woo, I'm so excited to be here. And what a lovely introduction, Jan. I'm going great. How are you?
I can't complain, and you just have to pat yourself on the shoulder because that's all you. I simply, gathered some of the things you do and put them here on a piece of paper. So the person I introduced is Nicole Holland. You may know her.
I do know her. Yes. It's lovely to be here. You're one of my favorite people, and it's nice to get into your hot seat. I've interviewed you a couple times now, and always love talking with you.
Yeah, likewise, really. And I'm so fired up about this and specifically about the topic. And I think the first question I have to ask you, Nicole, is I said you wear many different hats, and one of those is being a podcaster. So you have a couple of shows. You are a podcast guest as well, as people can tell, because you're here as a guest. And, and the first question I have to ask you is why in your entrepreneurial journey you started to focus a lot on podcast guesting, not only for yourself, but also for your customers, because many people are into podcasting only as hosts and never do any interview as a guest. So why did you kind of decide to put more emphasis on that and leverage podcasts as a guest expert as well?
Oh, wow. Well, there are so many reasons, but I think first and foremost, when we get involved in something, and I should say that I was not a podcast listener. When I started podcasting, I didn't really know much about what podcasting was, but I had interviewed John Lee Dumas for my summit about podcasting. And that was the extent of it, and then he basically said to me, you like interviewing people, you should do it. It's a lot easier than a summit. And I'm like, I'll look into it, and I just thought it'll be something I can do for marketing, but I wasn't like expecting to, I just thought it's just another thing to do.
Right.
I love it. I loved it. I loved getting to know my guests like you, like other great people. I loved the interaction with my audience. I loved everything about it. I really loved it. And as I was interviewing and interviewing and interviewing, I started noticing that just because somebody was like high profile and like a great guest by standards of popularity did not make them a great guest by standards of mine. And as I grew as a podcaster and improved my craft, I also upped my standards of what I wanted for my audience and from my guests. And I was very fortunate that I was chosen to be in the new and noteworthy section for a very long time, right from pretty much a few weeks after I got started. And so that got me a lot of attention, a lot of people cold pitching me, a lot of people wanting to be on the show. And I quickly had to navigate how to say no and who to say no to. And yeah, I just went through a lot of my own stuff there. And I started noticing, I'm like, well, this person was a really great guest, even though they're not a big name, if you will. Right. And this person who is a big guest or a big name was really not a great guest because of this. So I started I have a very strategic mind. It's just natural. And, and so I thought, and I had already started podcast guesting at that point because I thought, well, if I'm going to be a podcaster, I should also share about the podcast as a podcast guest. And I should also know the experience from the podcast guest perspective. And so I started testing these different theories that I would have or these awarenesses that I would have. And I'd say, oh, I like this, I like this, I like this. And I've seen these people do it and I don't like this and this and this. So then I would go in to an interview with that intention to try and emulate what I liked and get away from what I didn't like. And I was seeing results and I was tracking and I was seeing listeners turn into leads and I was getting super fired up. So the more I did that, the more I would recommend to my guests who I had good rapport with. I'd say something like, are you open to some feedback after an interview if there were things that I thought weren't so great? And I said, next time you do an interview, I'd recommend this over this because I think this will be the outcome. And hey, by the way, would you like an introduction to other podcast hosts? Because I really like you. I like your message. I believe in you. And I'm excited to share you. So that was all just very natural. And then I had people coming to me saying, you need to teach this. Wow, I'm so impressed with your systems. Wow, I'm so impressed with this that you do. Wow, I've done 50 interviews and I never even thought about this until you put it in front of me. And now I'm seeing conversion. Now I'm seeing this experience and that experience. You need to teach this. By that point, I had already started writing a book because I was so fired up about my observations and tests and excited about helping other people not just be great guests for themselves, but it was quite selfish. I was sick and tired of having guests that weren't up to snuff. And I didn't want to be in that uncomfortable position where it's like, do I air it? Do I not air it? So I started writing a book and then I had feedback from some mentors and friends that said, look, you need to stop the book. You need to do this in a course because you need to get money from this now. And that made a lot of sense. So I beta tested a program I called Interviews That Convert in the summer. And I knew, I had proven that there is a need for this and that I have such a different angle than anybody else that I know of who teaches about podcast guesting. And people who resonate with me and with my message and with my personality and my style, they want more of what I'm saying. And so I thought, okay, I was going to full on launch in February this program with partners and everything. And I have tons of people supporting me and I love them so much. I love you, Yan. You've been such a huge cheerleader for me. But I was really stuck in the creation of it. Now, by this point, not only was I teaching people how to be a great guest, but I had people coming to me and saying, I want to hire you not to make connections for me because I'm busy. I want you to actually take care of the bookings. So by this point, I had already started doing a VIP service where I soup to nuts do everything for my clients, from doing the research, pitching them, booking them, managing their calendar, prepping them for the interview, following up after the interview, all of it. So I said, okay, well, how can I do something that serves people at different levels and doesn't drain me and all this stuff? And so I came up with the idea for having this podcast called Get Guest Ready, which is where I actually give away all of my tips and strategies that I was previously charging for, which some of my beta students were like, really? We paid for that. And I'm like, don't worry, I'm still taking care of you.
Right.
But yeah, I'm just giving it away. And I actually created a course to go with that called Get Guest Ready School. And that's free. And it's 3 weeks. And again, it just goes through and gives people all of my tools, teaches people what I do for my VIP clients, what I do for myself, and talks about goals. And coming back to your question, one of the goals I set for myself, because I think it's important that we walk our talk, right?
Absolutely.
And so I set for myself for 2017 to get featured on 100 podcasts. And I am well on my way. This week, we're recording today. This is one of 3 interviews I'm recording today. Yesterday, I recorded 3 interviews. So I have 10 interviews booked for this week. That's my deal.
Well, thank you for sharing your story with us, Nicole, in terms of what led you to leveraging podcasts more and more and doing so as a guest as well. And I have to ask you, because you said sometimes there were some guests who left you wondering a little bit like, about this episode. And, as you kind of started to master more the art of being a podcast guest as well and host, the more you manage to find the sweet spot, so to say, not only for yourself, but also for people you wanted to interview, and then eventually for the shows you wanted to be featured on as a guest. So if you think about the people you have interviewed, what would you say were some of the mistakes you would see them do during their interviews? And it could be, actually, let me add something. It could be about them, or it could be even about people who you may have not interviewed. But are there some common mistakes maybe you see podcast guest experts make when it comes to the interviews they do?
Absolutely. And thank you for asking. I think that it starts with the agreement to be on a podcast between the podcaster and the guest that's not a fit. I think far too few people look at not only, okay, well, this is a show for entrepreneurs, for example. They need to also look at not only who is the audience. The audience is super important, but who is the host?
Right.
Do I actually like the host? Would I have a beer or a coffee with the host? Could I engage in a fun conversation? And if the answer is yes, you're on the right show. If the answer is no, you are not going to connect. And podcasting is such an intimate medium. Your listeners who are listening right now, they're leaning in or they've tuned out. So either this is background noise because they're really not interested, or they're so excited about our conversation that they're leaning in and really taking note. I like to equate the podcast interview experience at and this isn't for everybody, all shows are different,
right.
But generally speaking, when you're with an independent podcaster who's a professional, who's not just starting out and following a script, but they're actually sold on their craft. It's like being in a cafe and we're sitting, I can actually imagine with you, like jazz playing in the background, of course, and we're sitting at this little iron table, out on a patio, and we're really leaning into each other and having this intense conversation. And we know that there are people at the tables all around us who can hear us, and they're actually eavesdropping a little bit,
right.
Because what we're talking about is so good, and we don't mind because we appreciate that people are so excited. And that energy, I think, is key for a standout great interview. You're not going to get it all the time. Those are fewer and far between, compared to the standards. But I think if you shoot for that, both as a podcast host and as a podcast guest, whoa, that is where magic happens. So that's one tip. I've got a couple more if you'd like.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And thank you for stopping and talking about what to do before we actually are the guest on the podcast. You said it doesn't start with the actual interview. It starts with, first and foremost, asking oneself, is the host somebody I would see myself having an engaging conversation with. So thank you for sharing that. And absolutely, if you have more tips, we're all ears.
I do. But before I do, I actually want to say that's not where it starts. But at the interview level, your job is just to go in there and deliver all of the work almost. I would say probably 80% of the work is pre-interview. And what I just told you about is probably at the 40% or 40% mark or 50% mark, because before you even need to do that, you need to get really clear on your ICA or ideal client avatar, ideal client customer. And I know you definitely teach plenty about this, Jan.
Yeah.
But people need to know what their wants are, what their goals are, the outcomes they're looking for from a big picture perspective, as well as a strategic perspective. They need to know who their ICA is, what shows their ICA is listening to, keeping in mind your ICA is a whole person.
Right.
You come from a holistic standpoint, right? So if I run up against a lot of people in the entrepreneurship area looking just to get on entrepreneurial shows because that's what they believe they need to do. And when you say, well, what about this show? Like you are a Christian, for example, what about this show for Christians?
Right.
No, I don't want to talk about, my Christianity. I just want to talk about entrepreneurship. Okay, fine. You're missing a huge audience there because hello, entrepreneurs are, or whoever your ICA is a complete person.
Right.
And most people don't listen for work on their off time. When people are listening to podcasts, they turn in to be educated, they turn in to be entertained, they turn in to be connected, informed. There's all these different reasons. So you need to know what your ICA is tuning in for and recognize that they may be a dog lover. So maybe even though they run a multi-million-dollar corporation, they aren't listening to podcasts about business on their off time. Maybe they're listening to podcasts about dogs.
Right.
So just being open to looking at your personal interests and those interests of your ICA and finding where that happy place is where they meet and you can talk about something. Because at the beginning and end of almost every guest opportunity, somebody's going to introduce you with a bio. You can provide them with information about what you do, right? So you should open it up with, here's who this person is from a high level perspective. And you should end it with, here's how you can continue the conversation with them. Everything in the middle should be about connecting. So looking at all of your wants, all of your your target market or ideal client avatars wants, looking at personality, looking for those types of things. Those are so, so key before you reach out to pitch. When you reach out to pitch, reach out in a way like you would if you were wanting to date somebody.
Right.
Flirt. Right? Give the podcast host some inkling that you're interested in them and see what you can do to get their interest in you. Share their content, make a 5-star rating and review. I always tell people, if you cannot, in good faith, leave a 5-star rating and review for a host, for a podcast,
that's not your show.
Not your show. You shouldn't be there. Why would you waste your time on something you're not super excited about? That's just silliness. But I think that's what most people do. They're like, well, I'm playing the odds. I'm playing the numbers. Those kinds of sales tactics worked in the 80s and the 90s. They're not working today so well. People want connection. They want relationship. They're not looking to be talked at. They're looking for inspiration, right? We need inspiration in this day and age. Keeping your eye on trends also is important because maybe we'll go back. Maybe, we'll get to a point where once podcasting's still fairly new and everybody, it's getting out in the cars and it's a big boom right now. But maybe we're going to get to a point where, as they say, marketers ruin everything, where people are like, and we're going to tune out and go on to the next hot thing. Maybe that's where they will want to have more very structured or very stiff things just as they are, in a different way. But today that's not the case. So stay on top of trends. Another thing is for the actual interview itself, make sure you are using quality equipment. Make sure you're in a quiet place. When it comes to disappointing experience on a podcast as a host, as me, right? For me as a host, I get disappointed if I haven't done the pre-work recognizing if this person is a fit or not. I would say, especially at the beginning, yes to people who I didn't really know just because of their accolades or their recommendation by somebody else. Now I require people to actually apply. If I don't know you and you're cold pitching me, great, there's an application process, which includes a video of you telling me why you think you're going to be a great guest on that show, on my show. Because I need to know if there's a connection there. I know my audience. I know me. And I know where I get the best interviews. So you want to make sure. So that's the one thing. But the other thing is when people show up and, this is a gripe I hear from podcasters all the time. I've told them, I sent them information. I told them, get the right, headset or whatever, and they still don't do it. That drives me nuts. It shows so little respect.
I agree.
And frankly, along with the 5-star review, if you cannot invest $20 to $30 in a flippin' headset to get on shows and you insist on using your MacBook or, your earbuds or whatever because you say it's good enough and somebody told you it is, you don't deserve to be on that show. We as podcast hosts, we either pay in time or money to produce this. We build an audience. We nurture that audience.
Actually, if you're here with Nicole and I, and what she just said applies to you. So you have been doing interviews with nothing but your computer, no microphone, because as she said, you're thinking that it's good enough. You're actually harming not only the podcast you're featured on, but yourself as well. Or what is your thought on this, Nicole?
100%, because we sound good. It's kind of like, when we did, because your summit was amazing and you were part of my summit as well. And when we do summits, we come in clear, right, in the video. And not always, our guests don't always, at least my guests didn't. And I was getting emails from people saying, oh, apparently there's something wrong, on my end. Like I've done something wrong because the guest is fuzzy. And you're clear. And it's like, it's not me. It's that the guest has not invested, $50 into a proper camera. So when you are using your own resources for your own stuff, whether it's a Facebook Live or, an audio for your community, or you're doing a call on a landline for one of these old school, like conference call lines, that may be fine for your community. But when you're going on a podcast or a video interview or whatever, you can generally count on the person hosting to be of quality, to have, like, that's their business, right? So when you show up with poor audio, poor video, or poor whatever, you are highlighting your lack of professionalism. Even if you're a true professional, when you go up with somebody else and your stuff is coming across worse. And people, again, they're running, they're cooking, they're listening in their ears to your interview. And when you're, when you're making all these noises, people will tune out because it's, first of all, it's irritating. And second of all, they're like, why would I listen to this person? Again, even if you're a super pro, if you don't show up with respect to the opportunity, you wouldn't show up to go on a stage unprepared, right? You wouldn't show up to, I don't know, anything, an interview for a job not being prepared. But it amazes me how many people, they think, well, podcast interview, I can just do that, in my pajamas from home. Great. Do it from in your pajamas from home, but show up like a pro.
Exactly.
Or people are going to assume that you're not.
I love it, Nicole. My headphones are on fire. What you just said, it's so right on the money, and it still amazes me. I mean, as you said, as I listen to podcasts and things like that how some people don't understand that they aren't only making a disservice to doing a disservice to the host and the audience, but they're also doing it to themselves. And I know personally that if I interview somebody who I can see that didn't really care about investing in a microphone or things like that, if a few months from now they reach out, I'm probably going to say, well, no, thank you, I'm good. Simply because I don't want to, they can do a disservice to me and my audience, but that can happen one time.
Yes.
They can keep doing it to themselves if they want, but I don't let that happen to what I do and what my community does. And speaking of professionalism, Nicole, I have to ask you about the overall presentation of oneself as the guest. So you talked about different things. You talked about the importance of preparing, the equipment, understanding that you can actually be on podcasts that are a little bit, quote unquote, outside of your path, for the fact that anyways, we are people. So even though you're an entrepreneur, you may be interviewed for a podcast about dogs. If your style, your personality clicks with a person, the person is going to check out what you do anyways. So you may get clients anyways, even by being on podcasts that at first glance may look like not a quote unquote good fit. And when it comes to the presentation, Nicole, and you and I talked about this some time ago, I have to ask you, because you are doing a fantastic job, and with yourself, obviously, as well as with interviews that convert, at presenting yourself or your clients in a great professional way. And there is one tool in particular you use that is guest expert webpage or something like that. So could you take a moment to share with everybody here what a guest expert webpage is and what should be included there, or what to think about when creating one?
Absolutely. And I will say, I know that we're kind of short on time. It is something I go in depth in Get Guest Ready, the podcast. That episode is already out. I forget which number it is.
Great. I'll link to it in the show notes, as well as with everything else we have covered.
Yeah. But I call it the Great Guest Profile. And I know most people advocate for a PDF one sheet. I hate getting those as a podcaster because sometimes the settings on them don't allow you to copy and paste, or they get like really funky where you copy and then you paste and all the words are together. There's no spaces between them. So it's just extra work for me when somebody sends me a PDF generally.
Right.
The other thing is, it's just a lot of information in a little space. And in this day and age, why is that necessary? Put it on a web page, put it on a dynamic page that's hosted on the website that you can update anytime, right? As things change, maybe you want to change your bio, maybe you want to change your picture. When you do a PDF, man, that's hard, right? But when you just put it on a website, you can update it and people can get the most current information in real time.
Right.
Bring your personality into it. That's the biggest thing. You want to keep it simple, clear. You want to make it sort of a hub, because when somebody is considering you, it's just like a dating profile, right? You want to put your best foot forward. You want to show some pictures. You want to say a little bit about yourself. You want to get their interest. That's all it's for. It's to get the yes. So you don't want to overload it with information, but you want to put enough on there to get somebody to say, "Ooh, I want more from you. Let's have lunch," right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, it starts with the first impressions. And it's nice you make this analogy of dating. Would it be okay for you, Nicole, if I link to I can add the link to mine as well in the show notes so that people can look at as example?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, great. Nicole, this has been a fun conversation. I know that you and I, being friends, we could literally talk podcasting or anything really for the entire day. But before we wrap it up, I just want to remind everybody, like always in the show notes, I'm going to add the links to everything we've covered, including the episode of Get Guest Ready that discusses the guest expert webpage. And Nicole, I know that you have prepared for everybody here that can really help people take the next step to this conversation. So can you share more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've put together a page. It's at interviews.convert.com/360 for 360. And it's just, I was giving away, before I started Get Guest Ready, I was giving away a 6-step checklist to help you get the yes from any host you want, really. But now that I've done the podcast, I go way, 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 way more in detail. So I've put together a page where you can opt in to get that one colorful PDF if you'd like. And also my show, Get Guest Ready, is right there. It's available on Stitcher, iTunes, and Google Play Music at this time. So yeah, it's just linked up there on that page. And then also I have another podcast where Jan was actually a guest on called The Business Building Rockstar Show. And I haven't put it in there yet, but you know what? I'm going to actually put your interview that I did with you for the Business Building Rockstar show on that page as well, specifically. And also, maybe you're like, wow, this was really interesting, but I don't think that I am ready for podcast guesting, or I'm not really interested in podcast guesting, but I just want to tell you how much I love you because, I love being adored. Feel free to reach out to me. All of my social links and email are at interviews.convert.com/360. Everything you need is right there to connect and to get some more from me.
Nicole, the only thing that is missing here is a mic drop. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for, first of all, for putting together the resource. You mentioned the page. I'm going to link to that in the show notes. And overall, thank you so much for being, first of all, a good friend, and for what you do with Interviews That Convert, the Business Building Rockstar show and summit, and now your new show, Get Guest Ready Podcast. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
And we are back. I told you that Nicole had some value bombs to drop. Hopefully you found this interview valuable. And if you've been on the fence about starting with being a podcast guest, hopefully this chat with Nicole is gonna give you that push you need to really get started. And she mentioned a downloadable resource she has put together. So make sure to go to the show notes page of today's episode, janilunga.com/episode 207, where you're going to find the link to that, the link to everything else Nicole and I have covered, including her podcast, Interviews That Convert. And I also linked to the Podcaster Lab, the new show I launched last week, because Nicole was featured on the first episode and she talked about podcasting as both host and guest. So if you're interested in hearing more from Nicole and you're curious about the new show, the Podcaster Lab, then you're going to find a link to that as well in the show notes. This is it for this week. In case you haven't yet, make sure to join the Podcast Growth Mastermind. The link to that is in the show notes page as well. Because the community is really growing. It has just passed the 900 member mark and is getting more and more engaged. There are more people joining every single day. We have interesting conversations. I do Facebook Live. We exchange interesting articles, resources, and so forth. So if you're interested in podcasting as a guest, as we've talked about with Nicole today, as a host, or both, make sure, once again, to check out the show notes page for today's episode, where you're going to find the links to all the goodies Nicole Holland and I have talked about here today. All right, I'll be back with you, like always, next week. And in next week's episode, we're going to talk about video, and more specifically about how you can make your videos, and I mean every single video you may have, how you can make that work harder to grow your email list, get more social media fans, and increase sales. Sounds interesting? Great. I'll see you next Wednesday. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the 360 Entrepreneur Podcast. For more tips and tools, head over to www.janilunga.com.